Looking forward to asking you so many things. I want to start, though, with a newsy question. Two of your friends, President Trump and Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell, are throwing bricks at each other. What is your advice to both men?
My advice is to take a look at the Democrats. They have deep divisions too, and yet they have learned how to work together in order to accomplish a bigger goal. And, in the past, we've had Republicans and Democrats with different ways of accomplishing the same thing. Now we're dealing with something else. We're dealing with one set of people who believes in traditional American values and American dream and, the independence of people with a government there to help. And we have another group that wants a utopian society where you give all power to the government and the government takes care of you from cradle to grave. Those are two very distinctly different things.
Well, they ought to both be aligned on that. But right now, Leader McConnell has argued that President Trump is responsible for January 6th, and President Trump has argued that Mitch McConnell has stabbed him in the back. What do you make about those two arguments?
Well, again, they need to be able to look at the big picture. You can always find things to squabble about, but when you focus on what is truly important, and that is saving our nation, saving the liberty that exists here, the founding principles of our country, that's far more important than the little squabbles over these other things.
So, should they desist?
What's that?
Should they stop throwing brickbats at each other?
Well, of course they should. That is a major problem in our society today. People enhance their own positions by trying to tear down others. We don't need to do that.
Do you think that's what? Do you think that's what Leader McConnell did, though, when he assigned responsibility for the January 6th insurrection to the president?
Well, obviously, it was unnecessary. There are plenty of other people throwing bricks. He doesn't have to do that. We all need to be thinking about how do we build this up. We need to be thinking about our children and our grandchildren. We're not going to have anything left for them if we continue to allow the very infrastructure of what is America to be torn down. Liberty and justice for all. One nation under God, living by Judeo-Christian principles. Judeo-Christian principles, what do they say? They say, love your neighbor. They don't say cancel your neighbor. It doesn't say destroy anybody who disagrees with you. We are fundamentally going in the opposite direction of the founding principles of our nation.
So, Dr. Carson, because I've heard you speak at Colorado Christian University and I've heard you use moral clarity often, what do you think happened on January 6th, and why do you think it happened?
Well, again, we need to analyze the facts. The facts say that they knew that there was going to be violence and people attempting to do things that were very nefarious. And there was an attempt to get more security there. It was denied. We need to understand why that attempt was denied to get the kind of help that would be necessary when dealing with a crowd like that. And we need to stop just saying we're only going to investigate, one side, the other side, we're never going to investigate. We're always going to give them a free pass. That's not liberty and justice for all when we do things like that.
So I know a lot of my audience are asking, though, Dr. Carson, and I want to go to the Institute very quickly. Does President Trump bear responsibility, large or small, for what happened on January 6th?
I think there's plenty of blame to go around. Could it have been handled better? Yes. If people had a retrospective scope and they could look back and do things differently, I'm sure they would. We can spend a lot of time ascribing guilt, or we can learn from things and move forward.
Does some of that blame go to President Trump that goes around?
I think when I say there's plenty of blame to go around, everybody has some responsibility there.
That includes President Trump?
Of course.
Let me ask that's what I knew you thought that. I just wanted people to hear Republicans have to be willing to say that. And I think they also have to be willing to say we lost the election fair and square, and we lost the election fair and square. Do you believe that?
I don't know about the fair and square part, but the election was lost.
Well, I'll expand on that because, again, the framers are as important to me as they are to you. And I recall never before the objection between the election and the transfer of power being as bad as this was, with as many questions about the legitimacy of the transfer of power as were raised. And I started calling President elect Biden on day two. Our
Well,
framers would not go for that, what happened.
I think the way the Constitution is written and the way elections are supposed to go was violated. Uh, there's no question that the legislators in each state are supposed to control the elections, not the Secretary of State, not the governor. People are not supposed to be making changes to the way that the election is done, just a matter of days or weeks before an election. There are a number of abnormalities. And if we're smart, we will fix those things so that people can have confidence in our elections. The reason that our country excelled, I think, is because of the power of the people. When we begin to deprive the people of their power because we have a system in place where things can be manipulated, it decreases the faith in the system. And that's a very serious problem when you're dealing with a republic.
That is true, Dr. Carson. But I think the job of a pundit is to be able to state fairly and with accuracy the position of the other side. And as an analyst, I would say, for example, Attorney General Josh Shapiro in Pennsylvania would say any objection to the changes made in Pennsylvania ought to be directed to the Republicans who championed those changes. And they made those changes in the Pennsylvania election laws a year before the election, and the Trump administration slept on their grievance. Therefore, they have no standing to bring that grievance. Don't we have an obligation on our side to accurately state what happened, which is basically Team Trump's legal team was lousy in the 6 months before and the 3 months after the election?
Again, I'm not sure that it does a lot of good to point fingers. But what we do need to recognize is that the system is not what it should be. And all of us need to sit down together and determine how can we have a system that is fair, equitable, apparent, very transparent, so that people have faith in the system. If we don't do that, we will see continued deterioration in our relationships.
I think you're right, but I think the ability to get there, and now we'll expand the conversation, is by being able to accurately represent the best presentation of the other side. So that when the Federalists and the Anti Federalists argued at the time of the framing, they did so in writing at length and repeatedly in words that everyone could read and not via sound bites. So if the new institute, the American Cornerstone Institute, is going to succeed, it's going to have to be able to argue and articulate. Indeed, if you were sitting around doing a brain surgery at Johns Hopkins and you and your colleagues were disagreeing on which way to go, you had to listen to each other, didn't you?
Well, that's the problem right now. We have people in their respective corners throwing hand grenades at each other, and nobody's sitting down and taking the time to listen to each other and respect other people's opinions. And that's the only thing that's going to save us as a country. The vast majority of the people in our country are reasonable people. They will help somebody who's having trouble. They will help a neighbor. They won't ask them if they're a Democrat or Republican. But along comes the media, and along comes the politicians to stir up trouble and to make you believe that that person living next to you is your mortal enemy who needs to be canceled, who needs to be destroyed, whose family needs to be harassed. Where did that come from? That is not America. And America is really more of an idea than it is a place. An idea about freedom and liberty and justice and opportunity. When we begin to destroy those things and we begin to try to micromanage everybody's life and decide what they can say and what they should think, it doesn't matter where that comes from. If it comes from the government, it's horrible. If it comes from big tech and media, it's horrible. It's horrible, period.
In the last month, for reasons that don't really matter, I've been drawn into the LA homelessness epidemic. 66,000 people are living on the streets in LA, and 10 days ago I was in Skid Row, which is the most horrific place I've ever been in America. I am curious, will the Cornerstone Institute put forward solutions on homelessness? Because, of course, the framers would say that's a local issue. But in Los Angeles, as you know, as the Secretary of HUD, it's a dysfunctional local government that does nothing for these people. They send them to Skid Row to die. Is the Cornerstone Institute going to tackle what I think is really one of the most pressing issues in America, what we do with our lost people who are being sent off to live on the streets?
Well, Hugh, thank you for asking that question. Yes, that is an area that we will be concentrating on significantly, recognizing that homelessness does not need to exist in this country. We have a lot of resources. You look at the Los Angeles area and the amount of homeless people there, which is accelerating each year, and the amount of money that is spent on homelessness there. It is an incredible amount of money. If it were used in an efficient and effective way, you could easily take care of the problem. But you look at all the regulatory barriers that exist there. By the time you get to adding those on, the costs are absolutely astronomical. The policies are not necessarily good too, because we have this, or they tend to emphasize housing first. Now, I like the concept of housing first, but not when it is done in isolation. It needs to be done with housing second and housing third. Housing second means you determine what caused that person to be there, and housing third, you begin to fix it. If you don't do those things, all you're doing is adding to the problem.
Now, doctor, when you say housing first, people don't understand what that means. That means some people reject faith-based institutions' ability to treat the whole person, to present the gospel, to get them off their addictive substances, or to treat their mental illness, just find them shelter. And that's okay in some instances. But the LA government, city and county, actively discriminates against faith-based institutions like Union Rescue Mission, Midnight Mission, Los Angeles Mission. They don't want those people if they insist on a sober living situation.
That's exactly right.
That departs from framing. Go ahead.
Remember, before there was such a thing as HUD, it was those faith-based organizations that did all this work. And one of the things we discovered during our tenure is working along with the nonprofits and with the faith-based organizations provides significant synergy for getting things done. There's some wonderful models out there. Even in like Riverside, California, one of the churches we visited built 4 single-family houses on their property for homeless people, and all the members of the congregation worked together with the goal of helping those families to become independent. Those are the kinds of things that make a difference in people's lives and the quality of people's lives.
So the American Cornerstone Institute, people can contribute to it. How will it be run? Where will it be located? And what's its agenda going forward?
It will be located in Washington, D.C. My thinking was my tenure is coming to an end and I can retire, relax, and play golf. But looking at the direction of our country, I recognized that that wasn't possible. And so a number of people actually have volunteered their time as we're accumulating funding, and the funding is coming along very nicely. But we will be not only based in Washington, D.C., but we will be doing a lot of things around the country. One of the things, again, that I discovered at HUD is when you have these roundtables, these various forums, and you bring people with different ideologies to that table, but you put in the middle of that table the facts, the evidence, and say, let's solve this problem based on the evidence, not on your feelings, not on your ideology, and keep people to that, we're able to make a significant amount of progress. That's what we need to do in America. That's what we're talking about when we say liberty and justice for all. We can't just take one group, the group du jour, and say everything's going to be surrounded around them and doesn't care what the fallout effects are to everybody else. That, again, is not America.
I want every listener to go to AmericanCornerstone.org, AmericanCornerstone.org, and join in Dr. Carson's effort. Dr. Carson, good to see you again. Keep coming back.
Thank you so much. Always good to be with you.